Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
All right, it is Monday. It is time to do a King of the Week. Joining me today to do so, Jack Jablonski. How are you doing today, Jack?
I'm doing well, Jesse. Good to be back with you, man.
Yeah, so this is going to be a weird week because, you know, we are sort of somewhat arbitrarily, although not really, it's based on the calendar, choose to go from, you know, Monday to Sunday. So Monday, the Kings have that huge comeback win against the Golden Knights. Hooray, everybody loves that. Wednesday, they have the come from behind tie, but then lose in overtime to Vancouver. Then they go on the road and get absolutely caved in by Dallas and St. Louis. It's really a tale of two teams this week.
It really was, but I think it's a week that the staff and probably the players as well aren't necessarily the happiest with, because even when they picked up 3 points out of a possible 8 and the two games at home specifically, there were segments of both games where they did not play well and they did not look like themselves. And then I think, you know, whether it's the confidence of being at home and feeling like, oh, we can turn it on or we've had success here, great. That's an awesome feeling to have. And they were able to pick up, 3 out of 4 points at home. But I think some of that play may have carried over into the away games, and we saw what the results were because of it.
Well, that's fair, and that's interesting. I hadn't actually thought about that, but you're right. The fact that they had to come back against Vegas and the fact that they had to come back against Vancouver, it reminds me of the questions I had at times last season, which is it a good thing or a bad thing that you're making these comebacks, right? Because there was that game earlier in the year.
Of course.
Against Dallas where they came back and, I think it was a 5-4 win in overtime, if I'm not mistaken. And at the time, you're just like, okay, this is the second comeback win, second multi-goal comeback win they've had in the season. It's unquestionably a good thing. You're like, hooray, they did it. That was great. What a great game. But yeah, when you start to make a habit of it, it does become a question of like, well, are you playing correctly or are you just relying on talent or desperation or whatever to scrape these points out? So that's an interesting point. Then on top of that, you have the home and away splits, right? They're the best home team in the league, and on the road they're not even close to the worst road team, but they're sub 500.
They're just under 500.
Yeah,
but it's the good thing is that they're in a playoff position. That you're going to be guaranteed 3 home games. If you can go 500, on the road in the playoffs, that's great. But of course, the level of talent, the teams you're playing,
assuming you keep the home record.
But and that's the hard part, right? It's not just a guarantee just because you had the best record. Maybe you go up against a team that has, whatever. The Kings have lost, say 4 or 5 games at home. Guess what? Maybe 2 of those losses are against the team in the playoffs that you're playing. So you don't know, but like you said, and kind of, how we kicked off that conversation is some habits, not great, but the ability that they have and the talent and the confidence that this team has to know that they're not out of any game is really important as well.
Well, and one of the things, and apologies to people who are listening who are hoping for more in-depth analysis than I'm able to give this week. I laid out my health issues last episode, so if you're curious as to why, go listen to that. But I'm beginning to get back into a more in-depth, level of watching the games, right? I'm starting to, the first couple games I watched when I came back, I wasn't looking at any websites. I was just watching the games.
You
And
weren't
now,
looking at the fancy stats and
not at all. Not at all.
the winometer.
I forgot they even existed. I was just watching the games. And now I'm seeing stuff on Twitter and people are complaining about all these things, and I'm looking into it and I'm looking at minutes and, line combinations and how many minutes they're playing together. And it seems like at the moment they have two lines that they like in Deneau, Moore, and Fogle, which is a line that I always suspected would work. And then Byfield, Kempe, and Fiala. But, and I understand that Kopitar's been in his sort of typical early winter slump.
Rut. Yeah.
It's called slump. We'll call it what it is every year. But it's getting a little bit long now. And playing him on a line with Laferriere and Turcotte is not, I don't think, you're essentially deactivating the effectiveness of a third line for the Kings, because Kopitar, Laferriere, and Turcotte, although their numbers were good the other night, if I recall, against St. Louis, I just don't have a lot of faith that that's like a reliable third line. And Kopitar is still Kopitar. I mean, he's not Kopitar 28 years old, 24 years old, whatever, but he still has Kopitar's brain and he still has Kopitar's body. He may not have speed. He may not have, all of the strength, but you see last season, right? When he was with Kempe and Byfield, and earlier this season when he was on a point rush. And a lot of that can be attributed to line mates, but you go, okay, he is still an asset, even if he's not the asset. So relying on two lines and going to the 11-7, or even 12-6 when they put Thomas in, the fourth line is a non-factor. A couple of years ago when they made the playoffs in 22, the lines were the second line and the fourth line. And it was that Lizotte, Kaliev, and Lemieux line that was like, well, what is this? Why does this work? And you go, I don't know. It just does. The current fourth line is not that. So, if you're relying on two lines, they've kind of got to score you out of your problems. And right now they're not. So anyway, that's a lot of preamble to getting into the King of the Week. So we're going to start off with your honorable mention this week for King of the Week.
My honorable mention is going to be Quentin Byfield. Okay. I think what he has, so maybe your King of the Week is QB. I don't know, but I'll lead with my honorable mention, and that is QB. I think what he has done in the last, say, 2 weeks to start putting a little bit more of his abilities together to be consistent, to use his speed and his skill and his power forward abilities to then get himself on the scoreboard and start setting up players. And of course, we would, I think, love for him to shoot more, but just being on the stat sheet more, as we've seen, I think the confidence within his game is growing. And now to see Jim Hiller, make line changes in favor of how good he is playing, I think says a lot about his game. So QB is my guy for honorable mention.
Okay, that is fair. I have him higher. I won't reveal yet where, but yes, I do have him higher. My honorable mention for the week is Trevor Moore, mainly because he has 3 goals and a +1. Yeah. And, we talk about the two lines going. And Trevor Moore has this really odd place in the Kings' offensive hierarchy right now, because if you look at the point producers that you are expecting, it's Quentin Byfield, it's Kevin Fiala, it's Adrian Kempe. You hope that Andrei Kopitar comes around. I was looking at the points today on, the even strength points today. I'm going to try and pull it up real quick. I should have had it up. I should have left it up. But I was sort of surprised at who leads the team in even strength scoring, because it's not necessarily who you would think it is, as I pull it up here real quickly. So even strength scoring for the LA Kings, Warren Fogle is tied with Adrian Kempe with 30 points.
Yeah, not necessarily something you'd expect, right?
No, I mean, Adrian Kempe, yes.
Also,
Warren Fogle, absolutely not.
well, of course, yeah, but and that's just a testament to the job that Rob Blake has done in terms
Yep.
of signing Warren Fogle. I think a lot of people in the offseason, I by no means would I say question why would you sign Warren Fogle, but it was definitely an under the radar signing across the National Hockey League.
Yep.
And what he has done to bring depth scoring within this organization, it's huge. I don't know where the Kings offense or record even would be without the production of Warren Fogle, because of how much he has been able to spread the wealth throughout the lineup in terms of
Let's
stepping. Yeah,
save more Fogle talk because he's also up on my list. So I want to talk,
fair,
but I want to talk about more because because Fogle is playing that role, you now have Fogle, Kempe, Byfield, Laferriere, Deneau, Kopitar, Fiala, Turcotte, and then Trevor Moore with 4 goals, 13 assists, and 17 points at even strength. And so Trevor Moore is making money, and he is looked upon as, as an offensive weapon. But the reality is he isn't performing that role. And so for him to, start to emerge again, I think is crucially important for the team because, you have these players that are, I love Deneau and I love Fogle, but they don't play wide open games, as it were. And,
well, the Kings don't play a wide open game.
Yes, correct.
And you're right. Like the Kings, to be successful, have to play a more tight knit game. Like we saw what happened when they tried to open it up. I think in Kevin Fiala's first year, and every game to start the season was 7-5, and
Right.
that's not winning hockey for the Kings based on the skill set and the assets that their best players have. So no question, playing 6-5 hockey isn't within the Kings' DNA, but to have some of the weapons that occasionally when things start to turn into that we have some bodies that can be contributors and are comfortable within that game without sacrificing some of the defensive lapses that could happen.
Yeah. So Trevor Moore's scoring goals again, so he's my honorable mention. Your runner-up for King of the Week this week.
My runner-up was Trevor Moore, and okay. I think
perfect.
Just to add a little bit on that, because you touched it pretty well, is the addition of Trevor Moore offense is extremely huge for the Kings wanting and trying to make a run, past the first round.
Yeah.
You talk about the, we'll get into the Byfield, Kempe, and Fiala line here in a moment, but if that's going to be your quote unquote first line or your top producing offensive line, no question, depth scoring is important. You talk about that top 6, and of course that line is the Fogle, Moore, and Deneau line right now. That has to be a constant if this team is going to be able to push past the first round. And I think both, of course, you've got Deneau on the defensive end within there who plays extremely smart and has one of the highest IQs. But on the offensive end, both of those wings have to produce. And for Trevor Moore to hopefully find some more confidence and see that puck go in the net consistently in this last week, I think that's a huge piece for the Kings to keep moving forward in this season.
I totally agree with you. Now we can get into Fogle because he's my runner-up. And he had, let me just check his stats. He had 3 goals and 1 assist at +2 in 17 minutes and 3 seconds of ice time. And when they signed Warren Fogle, first of all, apologies to Austin Stanovich. I could have sworn that it was a trade, Arvidsson for Fogle. I totally forgot that they just let Arvidsson walk and then signed Warren Fogle. So I corrected him on Twitter and I had to delete it because I was wrong. But when they acquired Warren Fogle, I said to myself, okay, I always liked him in Carolina. He thought he was dangerous in Edmonton. I expect that his points will probably drop because, he played with Draisaitl and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And, listen, there's, time yet for him to reach 40 points. And at the pace he's currently going at, he may do it and surpass his point total from last season, which I believe was a career high at 41. He currently has 32 points in 58 games. Like I said, plenty of time. But the way that he plays the game, as silly as this might sound, I feel is almost perfectly suited to the way that the Kings like to play offensive hockey.
I agree. I think it's well, if and sorry to interrupt there, Jess.
No, it's fine.
I really think the pairing with Trevor Moore is extremely smart because of the styles, right?
Mm-hmm.
They both love to be, in your face forechecking, cause the turnover, quote unquote, like the little ball of hate, the guy that's just a pest, a water bug that just never goes away. And if you can put two of them together, and it seems like, obviously Fogle has had a phenomenal year as a depth forward for the Kings because of what he's done offensively and the impact that he's had. Now, if you can get a guy like him and Trevor Moore to continue to build on that chemistry, whether it's through their forecheck and ability to move the puck in the offensive zone, I think those two bodies, as we kind of referred to over the last few minutes, are again a crucial key that can unlock the Kings' identity across multiple different lines and different ways to be efficient and productive within a game itself.
And I was glad to see him moved onto the line with Deneau and Moore, because like I said, I suspected, obviously he doesn't play the same game as Arvidsson. He doesn't have the same skill set as Arvidsson. He doesn't have the same build as Arvidsson. There's really nothing like about the two players. And yet I had the sense that with Arvidsson gone, Moore and Deneau complement each other in the way they play the game. They need a third party who complements the way they play, and you can mix and match that third player. It doesn't always have to be an Arvidsson type, but you can't just throw. Well, actually, I guess you can throw Fiala on there because it worked for quite a while. But earlier this year, it wasn't working, and so there has to be some measure of chemistry. There has to be some sort of agreement between the three players on what it's going to look like when they're out there. And I was really eager to see what it would look like with Fogle, but they were determined to play him in different spots throughout the season. And so now he's sort of landed on this line, and it's only been a few games, and we'll see how it goes. But I'm really enjoying it. And as I said, I think Fogle has been a revelation. And I've mentioned it before jokingly. I will continue to do so. I am insanely jealous of his hair. As a bald man, I have long since given up any fantasies of hair, and I've given up being jealous of people's hair. But every now and then somebody comes along and I go, my God, that is just a magnificent head of hair. And every time I see him in the locker room, I'm just insanely jealous. So for that and all the points, that Warren Fogle is my runner-up.
All it takes is one flight to Turkey in about a year, and you'll have a great head of hair, Jesse.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. So, all right, your king of the week then,
Kevin Fiala. Production, production wasn't there compared to last week, but still goals. Of course, you lead with the goal that he had against the Blues in the slap shot, bar down. I think he is the key to this Kings offense being able to compete with the best of the best in the NHL, especially in the playoffs. You've got a guy like Kempe who's obviously established himself as a guy who's going to put up 35, hopefully 40 goals again. Kevin Fiala, when they traded for him from the Minnesota Wild, this version that we've seen in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that I would say, and frankly, the majority of the year, both on the offensive end and the defensive end, that's the version of Kevin Fiala that they were hoping to get. And now that they have found that, I think it's crucial for this team and frankly for Kevin to be able to continue this type of play. And for this organization, I think that the sky is very much the limit if you can get a guy like Kevin Fiala continuing to produce and have 5 goals in 7 games. That's the Kevin Fiala they hope for. A guy that's going to have 40 goals and hopefully 100 points with his playmaking abilities.
Yeah, just 2 goals for him this week in 4 games in 20 minutes and 32 seconds of ice time. But he definitely, and we're dipping a little bit back, but we haven't done a King of the Week in quite a while. Apologies, everybody. But he was on. I mean, he's been on a tear like this. The last 2 games, nobody's looked good, so I'm not going to hold it against him. But yeah, he has been. I agree with everything you said. He's been. It's so funny. He just is 2 different players. And, for the first, quarter of the season, listen, I'm not going to hide it anymore. Privately, I was like, what is going on with this guy? Like, you can't put him anywhere. You can't play him anywhere. The fact that you can't play him anywhere means that your lines are frozen. You can't make any combinations. You're locked in. He's making it was rough. It was hard. It was very difficult. As soon as he starts clicking and going and playing the way that, like peak version of Fiala, all of a sudden it opens everything up. And you're like, okay, well now your top line actually can be Quentin Byfield, Adrian Kempe, and Kevin Fiala, which that's what your top line should look like. No disrespect to Alex Laferriere or Alex Turcotte, but on a team where you have Kevin Fiala and Adrian Kempe as wingers, and you have, Quentin Byfield, Anze Kopitar, and Phil Deneau as options for centers, there's no version of reality that should have Laferriere or Turcotte on your top line. Again, no offense to those players. Those players are great.
Yes.
But is Edmonton rolling out,
2 guys that have 20 something goals combined?
No chance.
No, and you're right. And again, like I do want to emphasize there's no offense to it, but that is not a top line in the NHL. A top line in the NHL, especially at a team that is playoffs and higher for expectations, is a team that has a 40 goal scorer and a 35 or 100-point getter in the middle with someone who's a game breaker. And of course, Byfield's numbers aren't popping off the charts, in terms of the whole year. But if you look in the sample size of what he's done in the last 2 weeks, that of course is the trajectory that the Kings have been hoping to see in Quentin Byfield. Consistency obviously has been an issue. We've seen streaks in the past of 15, 20 games where the offense has gone away. Of course, that is what the Kings, in terms of the growing pains and taking a guy who was a number 2 overall pick and a prospect with a high ceiling to then developing into an NHLer that is a threat at all times. And that's just the process. Hopefully this is that continued process and we just continue to see him explode onto the scene as a guy who can all of a sudden be a threat at all times throughout the game.
Right. So speaking of which,
all that to say, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of which, my King of the Week is Quentin Byfield, because he had 5 assists and a +3 in 4 games, 19 minutes, 28 seconds of ice time, 47% in the face-off circle, which is not great, but it's not awful. And, look, I have been seeing the comments online, particularly on Twitter, about whether or not Quentin Byfield is actually on the trade market, kicked off by Nick Kyprios. And I shared 2 thoughts in reaction to it. And one was, listen, don't listen to national reporters. They're fun, and I listen to them and I read them, and, it's great. You flip on TikTok or Twitter and you can watch, Frank Saravelli or, the Spit and Chicklets guys, and it's okay. It's great and it's fine. But if they're not following the team day in and day out, and I understand there's only a handful of people who follow the Kings day in and day out, and some of us work for the team and some of us, whatever. So I get it. But as far as I'm concerned, the likelihood of Quentin Byfield being traded is nil. And at one point earlier in the year, I believe Jim Fox suggested, I could be wrong, so I apologize if I'm putting words in Jim's mouth. I believe he suggested that it was possible that by the end of the season, Byfield and Kopitar might switch roles. And so I understand that Quentin Byfield is not Evgeny Malkin. And I understand that he was drafted second overall and that there is a certain portion of the fan base who expects that by virtue of being drafted second overall, that makes you, that makes the expectations for you a certain level. And if you don't reach them, then you are ipso facto a failure. And by virtue of being a failure, you must be traded. There's two problems with that line of thinking, at least two. I'll identify two. One is, if you don't think he's any good, how on earth do you think you're going to trade him for something better? Like, if you, the fan,
that's a good point.
If you, the fan, think, oh, he's a bum and a disappointment, well, how are you going to call up some other team and trick them and go, no, he's actually great. Why don't you give us your 19-year-old? Like, why don't you give us Slafkovsky, Montreal? Like, why would Montreal do that? And then on top of that, just because, like, there's this expression, don't let good be, or don't let perfect be the enemy of good. The Kings are going to be as good as they possibly can, right? That's what we want. We want the Kings to be as good as they possibly can. Would we like the Kings to be perfect? Would we like them to be dominant and unbelievable and tear through the league like they did in 2012? Sure. Are they capable of that? I doubt it. But why are we going to let why are we going to let an impossible dream interfere with the possibility of being as good as they possibly can? I think this team can win a first round matchup. I don't know about a second round matchup. I think it's unlikely, but I think they can win a first round matchup. And as I've had this fight with people, particularly our good friend John Hoven, who says the goal is to win a cup, not the first round. And I say, listen, from 1993 to 2012, they won one playoff round. And buddy, I'm telling you, I lived off of that playoff round for 10 years. Like, at this point, I just want some playoff success. So I will take as good as it can be. And I'm not worried about your perfect. I'm not worried about your, second overall pick, whatever. Kid's putting up 5 points a week. I'll take it. He's my king of the week. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, no, you're good, man. You're good. I think, no question, 5 points a week from Quentin Byfield is something that we have long wanted. Of course, I completely agree with the aspect of assuming the second round pick has to be all world Evgeny Malkin, and if not, it's a failure. Not the case. Of course, that's what you hope. And the reality of, someone being that good of all, whenever you're second overall pick, you like to think that there's a good possibility. We've seen flashes from QB in his abilities to be a point per game player or a game breaker in any situation. Consistency is that next step, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I go back to one more thing that you mentioned in terms of, we just want to see them win one round and we'll go from there. For you, the most Jesseism that I've ever heard is happiness is measured by expectation.
Yep.
Your expectation is one round and that's happiness. But for me, there's a long season still remaining. We have a trade deadline. Of course, the Kings have been rumored in trying to add a winger, so to speak, maybe a right shot winger, whatever it is. The Kings know that to be able to make another step or to be able to put themselves in a better situation, whether it's playoff positioning or matchups or just improving your team and seeing the window that some of your veterans have and where some of the younger kids are. The window is closing in terms of the veterans. And of course, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got guys like LaFerriere and Quentin Byfield and Jordan Spence, who have really blossomed onto the scene this season, playing vital roles. Turcotte as well has obviously stepped up from where he's been in the last few years. There's opportunity with that growth in the youth. But also you have to remember that, you've got a 37-year-old and a 35-year-old that are still carrying heavy minutes and have high expectations for both themselves and their play among, being able to lead this team. It's an opportunity for the management to try to go out and improve their team at the deadline. And I wouldn't put any expectations on a team's success or where we think they might end up at the end of the season until we get through that March 7th date.
Yeah, by the way, and I didn't know this, I just looked it up. Over the last 4 games, the 3 forwards with the best Corsi 4 percentage, Byfield, Moore, and Fogle. So
There you go.
60.9 for Byfield, 60.58 for Trevor Moore, 58.56 for Fogel. So it's not like best, but only best because everyone else stunk. That's like, those are good. Those are, you maintain those
Solid
all season
numbers.
long. Yeah, that was great.
And it also
So
says a lot when you've been outscored
yes,
10-3 in the last
yeah, and got
6
your heads
periods.
caved
So
in two of those games. And listen, I get it. I'm a little bit maybe feistier than I usually am when we do King of the Week, but I've been in a hospital bed for a month, so that's what it is. Anyway,
hey,
congratulations,
I'll,
Quentin Byfield, this week's King of the Week. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say it's good to have you back, and good to have a path of recovery for you. It's good to see you
Perfect.
again.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the upcoming week because it is a weird one. It's Chicago on the
Yeah.
road on Monday, and then St. Louis at home on the 5th, and then on the 8th. It's not even like on the 5th and the 6th or the 5th on the 7th. There's 2 days off. So and then Vegas on Sunday. I've totally forgot about Vegas. So let's start with Chicago. First of all, I want to ask you if you have an opinion about the trade Chicago made.
Yeah, that was the first thing I was going to get into. For anyone who's missed it, Seth Jones and a 4th-round pick are on their way to the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, and on the way back is obviously a former first-round draft pick in Spencer Knight, goaltender, and a conditional first that goes back to the Blackhawks. It's interesting. Of course, I think it's.
I want to make one real quick note
Yes.
about the conditional first.
Yes.
It's always a first. It's not like a first if and then it downgrades. Yeah. It's like a first if, and then if it doesn't translate to 2026, it translates to 2027. But it's always a first round pick, which I think is insane. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, that's what you got to do if you want to get one of the top defensemen in the NHL. But it's also interesting because, well, that's the thing. He's a very, very good. He's a far above average guy. He's on a. He's. I don't want to say. Yes, I do think he is a very good defenseman. He's making 9.5, and the interesting thing is that Chicago's retaining, I think, 26% of this, 9.5 million per year. He has 5 more years left on the deal.
It's such a crazy trade.
It's very interesting. Now, what you get back, Spencer Knight, and an eventual first-round pick, whenever it may be, that you have to believe within your scouting department, Spencer Knight is your future star goaltender. Yeah. He's had a ton of spurts and shown, a lot of promise, but he's also been in the recovery program within the NHL, substance or whatever it may be. So your due diligence has definitely have to be done when it comes to knowing what you're getting in a Spencer Knight. I think he has a phenomenal ceiling. And Chicago has to be very confident that this is their, cornerstone goaltender for the next 10 years by making this trade. Now, as for the Blackhawks themselves, they're, of course, not in a good situation in terms of their season. They're 18-35-7, second to last in the NHL, just ahead of the San Jose Sharks. Now, they had a rough February. They went 1-5-2, and now they flipped the calendar to March and they won 6-3 in Anaheim. So promising, or at least, step in the right direction if you're the Anaheim Ducks. Now, for me, I think you have to look at personnel, right?
Yeah.
Personnel, it starts with Ryan Donato, not Connor Bedard. Ryan Donato had a 3-point game. He's got a 4-game point streak, I believe, heading into Monday. So he leads the Blackhawks with 21 goals. And that's another person that's going to be very, very much talked about when it comes to the trade deadline, Ryan Donato. So how long he remains the Blackhawk is yet to be seen, but I imagine he'll be in a red uniform come Monday. Now, you do have to get to Connor Bedard. He leads the team in assists and points, 33 assists, 49 points. But he's slumping. He's got no points in his last 5 games. So it's been a tough year in terms of the mental battles that he's. Yeah, I know, right? Back at home. And so Bedard, obviously always dangerous, but in many ways, as an athlete, you feel for him with the struggles that he's had to go through on a team that is clearly not as competitive as a lot of the teams in the NHL. The other thing that the Kings are going to be tested with in at least 2 of the games this week is their penalty kill, because the Blackhawks power play is 8 for 16 in their last 16 opportunities.
I don't love that.
Yep, they're 6th in the NHL right now at 26% on the power play. So it's a Blackhawks team that has been able to score as of late. They lost 7-5 to Vegas in their a few games ago. So it's been a whirlwind of a season for Chicago, but ups and downs for sure. And a team that, while they are 31st in the NHL, has given the Kings fits in the past in the last few years at times.
I just want to backtrack really quickly one thing before we move on to St. Louis. Spencer Knight entered the player assistance program to receive help with managing obsessive compulsive disorder, according to this article.
There we go. Yeah.
So it's like, he's 23. He's the only reason he's available is because the Panthers, gambled on Bobrovsky, thought the gamble failed, but then now it turns out it succeeded. But Spencer Knight's numbers in the NHL are 44, 25, and 7 with a .906 save percentage. He's 23 years old. He's a former 13th overall draft pick. And a first, 5 more years of Seth Jones making $7 million basically. And I was talking to somebody about it, and they were like, well, he has to get better by virtue of playing for Florida, right? And I was like, well, I for Florida's sake, I hope so, because that's a big ask.
It's a huge commitment, but you've seen in this management that they're willing to make the big trade, right?
Clearly, yeah.
You got rid of you bring in Matthew Tkachuk for Jonathan Huberdeau, who has 100 points in the season prior. Yep. They've identified what they believe is players or personalities or stylistic pieces that they believe is playoff, success. And I very much think that, they hope that a guy like Seth Jones can slot into the role that Brandon Montour played last season. Of course, they lost him to free agency to Seattle. Now they get a guy like Seth Jones, who at one point was one of the top defensemen in the NHL. Of course, it's hard, I think, for anyone to be able to equate how good he, quote unquote, still is because of the team and the situation he was on. Right. When you don't have the puck and you're chasing it around your own net for 3 years in a row, that's not easy to do. Of course, it takes a toll on you physically, but mentally as well, in terms of trying to stay positive. It's no fun to be on a team that continues to lose. I think he gets a second life at chasing a cup, and I think it's again, time will tell if it's a win-win, if it's a lose-lose, or if one team, clearly got the better of the two. But for now, I think this is a team in Chicago that is able to move on from a piece that clearly didn't want to be there based on his comments regarding the locker room and, of course, the team's play. You get rid of a piece like that, you bring in another young prospect or NHL-ready player that's kind of ready to take on the brunt of an area where you obviously want to solidify. And for Chicago, it's a step in the right direction of staying young, building up some pieces, and unfortunately for them, it's a matter of getting experience, and then hopefully in the offseason they can try to improve their team, surrounded by a guy like Connor Bedard, who of course is an all-world player.
Yeah, well, you're right. Florida built that team, that cup-winning team, on trades and free agency, so not the draft. So good for them, I guess. All right, let's talk about St. Louis, because we got them twice. Like I said, spread out by a few days. So we just saw the most recent game that you will have been able to watch if you're listening to this Monday morning is the loss to the Blues 4-1. So what are the Kings' chances of collecting, any points in the next 2 games or following the Chicago game?
Yeah, well, the good news is you're playing on home ice where you've had success. Mm-hmm. The Kings, of course, did not play a great game when it came to their response after taking the early 1-0 lead. Things, of course, went south from there. But, you've got a team like St. Louis who is very much in the middle of the playoff and wild card race. It's very up in the air in terms of yet to be seen on if they will be buyers or sellers at the deadline. They're, I believe, 1 point out of the Western Conference Finals, and they're fighting essentially for one spot between themselves. Vancouver, Calgary, and Utah are all right in the mix of that final wild card spot, with a little bit of distance between themselves and Colorado, who holds that top wild card.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we saw it on I believe, Saturday. The depth for St. Louis is actually their strength in terms of offense. Now they've got a veteran core of defensemen. You got guys like Suter, you got guys like Cam Fowler, who they brought in, Nick Leddy, of course, Colton Parayko, who scored against the Kings on Saturday. So, big puck-moving defensemen that have a lot of veteran and or a lot of experience in games under their belt. On the offensive end, they've got 4 players with 40 points. And just to put that in comparison, the Kings have 2. So you've got guys like, Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, Holloway, Dylan Holloway, who of course came from the Oilers, and Pavel Buchnevich. While I bring up Holloway, of course you have to bring up Philip Broberg, who was also on the Oilers. They both offer sheeted them in the offseason, and both have been, great, pieces in terms of additions for this organization. So this is a team that rides with their depth. Jordan Binnington has been outstanding since he's come back from the Four Nations. 3 starts, he's given up 4 goals. And then a guy that we saw score against us on Saturday, and Zachary Bolduc, who has 4 goals in his last 4 games as well. So he was another young piece, I believe, a first or second round draft pick in the last 5 years. So there's a lot of reasons for St. Louis to be happy with where they're at. Are they going to be able to make a run? Do they buy? Do they sell? That is yet to be seen. But with the deadline coming up pretty quickly, we're going to find out during that span between the 2 games, most likely.
Yeah, I mean, there was, this question, who was benefited the most by the Four Nations tournament, and I don't think there's any question it's Binnington, right? Like, just by reputation alone.
Yeah, I mean, they should go sign. Boston should trade for him. He's unstoppable in that building.
Yeah.
No question. There were a lot of question marks when they started Binnington and then proceeded to play him in every single game over the likes of Aiden Hill and even some goaltenders that weren't even on the roster.
Yep.
But his ability to play the puck is a game changer. It makes breaking out and averting from pressure behind their own net so much easier when you've got a guy like Binnington that can play the puck. So it completely changes your game plan when you're trying to enter their zone. You can't get it anywhere near him, or he's going to be able to start that breakout. It's a talent and a skill set that not as many goaltenders have in terms of his elite level, but of course a theme that many goaltenders do have these days. So Binnington definitely in the 99th percentile of that category, and no question his confidence has to be sky high after what he did in the Four Nations tournament, and specifically the gold medal game against the United States.
So final game of the week, they couldn't they couldn't be bothered to put the second Blues game on the 7th so that the Kings had a day off between games. They have a game on Saturday the 8th against St. Louis at home, then 9th on the road against Vegas, a Vegas team that will presumably be out for revenge.
No question. It'll be the season finale between the 2 teams. Of course, the Kings won their most recent matchup last week on Monday. Now you've got a season split earlier between the 2 teams. The Kings won in Vegas in their first meeting, and then the Vegas Golden Knights responded by beating the Kings, I believe, in October. So we hadn't seen them for a while. Of course, the strong third period by Quentin Byfield and 4 goals for the team catapulted the Kings to that victory over Vegas. We head to Sin City, as you mentioned, a team that's first in the Pacific with a little bit of clearance over Edmonton. I believe it's just 2 points. And then as for the Kings, it'll be game 5 of 5 that Vegas is playing at home. So closing out a homestand. We know that the Kings have had success on their home ice. Vegas right there with the Kings. They're fourth in the NHL in terms of home point percentage with 21 wins, 6 losses, and then 3 in extra time. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, a team that is extremely strong on the power play. They're third in the NHL at 27.9%. Led by a guy that the Kings have seen 46 times in their career, Tomas Hertl. He's got 12 goals in his last 17 games. I believe that's third in the NHL. And he's got 31 points in 46 career games against the Kings. So they've got a lot of people that are rolling in the right direction. Adin Hill, obviously he did not play in the Four Nations, but he's playing as we're recording this on Sunday coming up. So I don't have the latest on the game against New Jersey, but in his first game back from the Four Nations, he had 34 saves on 34 shots for a win. And then a surprising Brett Howden has 7 assists in his last 4 games. So they're getting some depth contributions like the Kings have. And of course, when you've got a guy like Jack Eichel, who's 8th in the NHL in points with 70 on the year, this is a very dangerous team, as we've come to know since they have entered the NHL.
Yeah, well, hopefully the Kings beat him again. Jack Jablonski, thank you so much for joining me this week. Appreciate all the info and all the insight, and I will talk to you soon.
Absolutely.